Have you ever heard the phrase, music is the universal language? I see it on t shirts and headlining articles often. This is often mentioned by musicians and music teachers who want to highlight something incredible about their profession, and they're right to highlight it. It is incredible. What they often mean by calling music a universal language is this: music communicates things to us through our emotions that do not rely on spoken word or a shared cultural background. It transcends linguistic barriers and connects people from all walks of life. And that is a beautiful thought. There are two things that I really like about this phrase, universal language. First, it recognizes that one experience can be shared by two unlike people. Consider somebody from France and somebody from Italy meeting in Belgium to hear a performance of Mozart that resonates with them both, but they can't talk to each other even if they sit right next to each other. It reminds me of an episode of Star Trek when Picard was stranded with an alien who communicated through common fables and folklore. In an effort to connect, Picard shares his own common fables and folklore. He shares stories from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Both he and the alien knew the importance of telling these stories, even if they couldn't understand the specific words. I remember getting emotional when hearing the unintelligible Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, when the walls fell. We long to connect, and we like the idea that there are things in this world that can connect us despite our language barriers. We are enamored with the reversal of Babel. The second thing I like about this phrase is that it recognizes music as a language. Music therapists, psychologists, linguists, teachers, and performers have often pointed to the similarities that music and language share. Music isn't technically a formal language because there are no specific ideas that it can convey. And Stravinsky famously pointed this out himself when he says this: "For I consider that music is, by its very nature, essentially powerless to express anything at all, whether a feeling, an attitude of mind, a psychological mood, a phenomenon of nature, etc. Expression has never been an inherent property of music. That is by no means the purpose of its existence." Despite its setbacks, though, music tends to take on meanings through associations with emotions or even with characters in a story. Consider Wagner's leitmotif in soundtracks like The Lord of the Rings, and I'd love to do a video where I talk about the different character themes used by Howard Shore in the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. It also seems to have grammar, and it functions in chords. And musicians learn vocabulary through immersion. Victor Wooten gives an excellent TED Talk about this. Furthermore, there have been studies on the areas of the brain that are activated when listening to or playing music, and many have concluded that music highly activates the language centers of the brain. But where this saying falls apart is when we ask, how universal? The example I gave about someone from France and someone from Italy meeting in Belgium, that's not really without shared cultural background, because Europe as a whole has a millennia-long cultural background of classical music. So when two people meet in Belgium, they're still sharing in a common cultural experience. We could also ask, what do you mean by universal? Ethnomusicologists and music therapists alike tend to take issue with some of the implications here. Some people are calmed by the music of Brahms, while others are calmed by the music of Black Sabbath. Some people find Brahms uncomfortable to listen to, and many people find Black Sabbath to be anxious to listen to. If by universal we mean that all people, or even most people, can resonate with music in the same way, then music is not a universal language. We all have our preferences and our tastes, because things resonate with us differently. If by universal we mean that all cultures across the world develop music that reflects similar themes and emotions, then it is universal. In the latter case, though, we might need to be more precise with our phrase. Music occurring all around the world in similar ways, but it doesn't resonate with people across cultures, is more aptly termed a universal phenomenon than a universal language. This Harvard study is correct in its findings, but its presentation through this article is incredibly misleading. The researchers found that music arises similarly cross-culturally, and that the sound of the music tends to be tonal, with the effect of certain sounds being similar despite background. What's presented, though, is that we finally have some scientific evidence to prove that music is a universal language. By some understandings, that might be true, but the terms were never defined to explain what's meant by universal or by language. This study did not prove that Mozart's music carries any meaning other than what the culture assigns to it. It did, perhaps, prove something much more interesting. There are some aspects of music that are connected to the human experience, or nature, regardless of one's upbringing, or nurture. The famous Buba Kiki example is a survey done across cultures. People are shown these two shapes and asked which is Buba and which is Kiki. Despite cultural differences, people overwhelmingly saw this as Buba and this as Kiki. There have been many theories which explore how the particular mouth shapes used to make these sounds, Buba and Kiki, can be associated with rounder or sharper edges. I think that music might have the same tendencies as Buba and Kiki. Keep in mind that the findings of this Harvard article are conclusive, but the interpretation of them is speculative. Trying to explain why some musical aspects are more universal than others is an exercise in theory and not in empirical research. With that said, I believe that music might hold some inherent cross-cultural meaning, and as far as it reflects things that are truly universal, such as laughter or crying. Listen to these trumpet techniques. Notice how they might be more inherently emotional than this piano solo. Imagine someone with no understanding of our culture at all, hearing a trumpet that sounds like crying. They would know exactly what it means the first time they heard it. But if they heard this hymn, they might think the sounds are soothing and gentle, but they would understand none of the infused meaning which come from the lyrics or from people that we know that sang this song, and we have some nostalgia for it. Amazing Grace without any lyrics is just noise. You might hear some songs like this. From other cultures that make us think, I know exactly what they're feeling. How could you say that music isn't universal? But this is only true because we can sense excitement in the rhythms, facial expressions, and the tone of music. What we don't see are the many examples of music that are just noise to us, but they have a significant cultural meaning to the people who sing them. As much as I love Bill Evans, his music is nonsense to people with no experience of jazz vocabulary and grammar. In fact, jazz musicians operate off of a shared cultural experience of the Fake Book and the Great American Songbook, which are show tunes that come from Gershwin and Cole Porter and many others. As hard as we try to say that music is a universal language, it's just as diverse and complicated as our spoken language. And I don't know about you, but I actually think that's much more exciting. If we're looking for a universal and unifying force that transcends the barriers of language and speaks directly to our hearts, we might find something like it in facial expressions, but as far as something that humans can come up with, we'll always be disappointed. There is such a force, though. In my Christian belief, I see that God has promised that very thing from the beginning. Christ's church is the very essence of a reunited world, reconciled to God and reconciled to one another. Psalm 67, verses 2 through 3 says this: "That your way may be known on earth, your saving power among all nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you." Thank you for watching. Be on the lookout for a part 2 where I discuss what is universal about the physics of sound and how independent cultures can naturally and separately come up with tonal and modal music, even if they hold different understandings of sound. I will see you next time.